Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church, and I'm here today to begin the second week of Advent with another story about Elizabeth. This passage for this week comes from Luke chapter 1, verses 5 to 7, and so I want to read that part again to you. In the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly order of Abijah. His wife was a descendant of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Both of them were righteous before God, living blamelessly according to all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. But they had no children, because Elizabeth was barren, and both were getting old in years. Zechariah and Elizabeth are very godly people. Everybody recognized that. Zechariah served in the temple. But in those days, people believed that if you couldn't have children, there was something wrong. You had done something against God. Now, we don't think that today, at least many don't, because we know about modern medicine and we know about physiological things that cause people unable to have children. But that wasn't how people understood things in Zechariah and Elizabeth's day. So this one day, Zechariah serving in the temple. And you can find it in Luke 1, 8 to 20. I'm not going to read the whole story, but I'll just read a few verses and take you some because Zechariah's in there and he's doing his priestly thing. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. After a while, you kind of know what's going to happen. You follow the ritual, and everything's okay if you did that. But while he's in there, an angel appeared to him, and that would have jolted him. Just like I expected jolt you or me if we saw an angel today. Now, the interesting thing is, we may have already seen one. We just didn't recognize him. But in Zechariah's case, he really did recognize it. And the angel says to Zechariah, don't be afraid. I guess you would be afraid in that setting, especially because back in the holiest of holies where Zechariah is doing his thing, doing what he has to do, nobody's allowed back there but him. And anybody who goes back there is going to die. So here's somebody else. And it would have made him afraid. And the angel says, don't be afraid. God has heard your prayers. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son, and you will name him John. Man, of all of the things that could have happened that day, that's the last thing Zechariah would have thought about. And, it's just, it's mind-boggling. But then again, God is mind-boggling if we want to look at it that way. So there's some more said here, and then Zechariah speaks back. He finally gets enough courage, I guess, to speak to this angel. And he says, how can I be sure that this will happen? I'm an old man now, and my wife is well along in years. I don't blame Zechariah for not believing. I don't blame him for not trying to trust. Sometimes our situations are so stark and profound that trusting God is about the last thing that's going to come to our minds and hearts. But it should be the first thing. And for Zechariah, who was a priest, he should have been able to say, okay, this is great news. But he didn't. He looked at himself and he thought of his wife and he says, I'm old and she's getting up in years. How can this be? So the angel answers him back. Must have been an interesting conversation. I am Gabriel. I stand in the very presence of God, It was he who sent me to bring you this good news. But now, since you didn't believe what I've said, you will be silent and unable to speak until the child is born. Now, think about this. I hope I hope Zechariah has finished his priestly duties. Because can you imagine something like this happen, and then all of a sudden you open your mouth and nothing will come out? Well, the story doesn't tell us. The Bible doesn't tell us all that happened after that. But for 9 months now, he's not going to be able to talk. And he comes out, and it's rather obvious something happened. I don't think anybody figured out what it was, and he couldn't tell them. He can't get a word out. So he goes home, and can you imagine the exchange between he and Elizabeth? And Elizabeth said, "Well, how'd it go today?" And he doesn't answer. And if they weren't looking at each other, you'd be tempted to turn around and say, "Did you hear me?" And he might nod his head. And she'd say, "Okay, then tell me, how'd it go today?" And he can't speak. It's amazing to me how God works in our world. He took an ordinary situation, somebody being able to talk, and turned it into a special moment that was part of the change of history. And I think today he does the same thing in our lives. Maybe it's not so dramatic. I don't know. But maybe it is. What we have here is God interrupting Zechariah and Elizabeth's lives. Not only in this moment when he can't speak, but because she's going to conceive and bear a child. And they're going to name him John, which is a whole other story, but that wasn't supposed to happen either. This Advent, I'd like you to think about how many promises have you made to God? And how many of those have you kept? How many promises does God have for you and me? How many have we missed in our lives? Advent is about hope and promises and this is going to change the world kind of stuff. And that's what God wants to do to your life today and every day. So you think about that. Think about your promises and what's happened. And I'll be back tomorrow and share another thought on this Advent week. I would say to you, though, if you have a concern or a need, let us know. We'll do everything we can, as fast as we can, to help meet your need. Thanks for listening. God bless you. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.